Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "The etymologist finds the deadest word to have been once a brilliant picture. Language is fossil poetry."
Grammar Girl here. I'm Mignon Fogarty, and welcome to the Thursday show where I chat with people who are doing interesting things with language. And you are in for a treat today because we have Martha Barnette, and we're going to talk about Greek gods, Ritalin, dubious formication, and more. Martha is a longtime journalist and co-host of the popular show called Away with Words and author of the new book, Friends with Words, Adventures in Languageland. Martha has a degree in English from Vassar, did graduate work in classical languages at the University of Kentucky, and studied Spanish in Costa Rica. Martha, welcome to the Grammar Girl
It's
podcast.
so great to be here, Mignon. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I am just delighted. So, one of the things you mentioned in your book is that you compare people who love words to birders. How do you do that?
Well, I like to think of us as worders in that, in the same way that birders love to discover new birds or just have a fascination with individual birds and really start to learn all about them one by one and collect them. It occurred to me because I got into birding last year, and it occurred to me that people like us are worders. We do the same thing. And I was also thinking about the fact that one interesting word that I learned from birding is the term spark bird. Do you know this term?
Mm, no.
This is the bird that really sets you on that path. You go on vacation and you see just this gorgeous bird, beautiful plumage, colors you've never seen before, and that gets you all excited about birding. And people call that their spark bird. And I was thinking
Ah.
about the fact that I and probably you and a lot of your listeners probably have that spark word, that one word that just sort of set you off to become a language lover. And
Okay, so what was your spark word?
well, this happened when I was learning Latin in ninth grade, and we had a list of vocabulary words to learn. And one of the words was vestigium,
Oh.
which starts with a V. It looks like vestigium, and it's the Latin word for footprint. And I'm trying to learn this long list of vocabulary words, just trying to cram them into my head. And it occurred to me, wait a minute, vestigium? Is that like investigate? And so I went and I looked up the word investigate in the dictionary, and indeed, that word has the footprint of the Latin word for footprint in it, as does the word vestige. And so I started looking up words like that from the Latin class that I saw a connection with in English. Agricola means farmer. Well, you can see the connection with agriculture. And so I would say that was the spark word that just sort of set me off. I was off to the races after that. I couldn't get enough of it. I kept going back to the dictionary.
Oh, that's wonderful. And, when you talk about birders, I think of, they have their little notebooks where
Yeah.
they track the birds they've seen. How do you keep track of all your favorite words? Because clearly from the book you have so many.
Oh, man. Well, years ago, I put them all on index cards, and I had thousands of index cards, and I was forever buying the containers to put the index cards in to write my earlier books on word origins. And now well, our show, Away with Words, has an archive online with hundreds and hundreds of past episodes. And so a lot of times I just go back to the episode if I can't remember a word or need to recall some detail about it. I also, for a project like writing a book, I can use an Excel sheet or something like that to keep a list, but a lot of them I just keep close to my heart.
Do you have little scraps of paper, like when you're out in the world and you see one, do you jot them down in all sorts of random places?
Of course, and I just stop everything down. If I hear a word, I'm out in public, I'm whipping out my phone, I'm going to onelook.com, and I'm looking to see all the different dictionary definitions of it. And yeah, I've put so many movies on pause because I don't want to forget them, and I usually don't have a piece of paper handy, but I usually have my phone handy.
Oh, that's wonderful. So in Friends with Words, you start by talking about how you've had this lifelong love of Greek, and there are all so many interesting word origin stories. And I want to know if you ever think of Nikes when you smell fennel.
I absolutely do. People will be surprised to learn that there is a connection, a very, very tenuous connection, but there is a connection between Nike and fennel because the ancient Greek word for fennel is a word that will sound familiar. It's marathon. And in ancient Greece, there was a plain that was called Plain. There was a plain called Marathon, and that comes from the Greek word for fennel, probably because there was a lot of fennel growing there. Now, this plain was very important in Greek history because in 490 BCE, the Athenians fought a battle there with the Persians, and they were outnumbered, but they managed to win anyway. And this was, of course, really big news for the folks down in Athens, who happened to be about 26 miles from Marathon. So you may see where I'm going here, or you may remember the story of Pheidippides. Here's this soldier. He's been out there all day fighting so hard, and they win. And he's got to drop his heavy shield and sword and run all the way to Athens to tell them that the Athenians have won, the Greeks have won. And so he runs 26 miles or so to Athens to make this announcement. And as he falls to the ground, he says this word in ancient Greek that means we have conquered or we're victorious. And the root of that Greek word in many versions of the story is the Greek word Nike, which means victory. If you go to the Louvre, there's a statue that's very recognizable of Athena Nike. She's got wings and she's winged victory. Now, fast forward about 2,000 years, you're in Portland, Oregon, and you're part of a company that's trying to come up with a name for a new pair of athletic shoes, a new model. And they were trotting out names like Dimension 6 or Peregrine, and then that didn't work. And somebody thought about the Greek goddess of victory, Nike, and they named the shoes Nike, and the rest is modern history.
That's great. And it is true when I think of Greek, I often think of the Greek gods and all their stories. And, we get so many words just from the names of those Greek gods.
We do. I'm thinking of words like Atlas. Atlas was one of the Titans. Well, we get the word Titanic from the Titans, who were this giant race of gods. And Atlas was a Titan, but he got punished by Zeus, and the punishment was to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, well, literally. And he was supposedly situated, suffering this punishment for all of eternity at the northwest corner of Africa, which is where the Greeks figured that the world kind of ended and the sky met the sea. And so there's a mountain range there now that's known as the Atlas Mountains. And the Greeks figured that that sea beyond that should be called Atlantikos. Now that probably rings a bell as well because that's Atlas's name fossilized in the word Atlantic. And that's not all, because if you're in the medical field, you may know that that uppermost vertebra in your neck is also technically called the atlas because it holds up the world that's inside your skull. So, Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, the etymologist finds the deadest word to have been once a brilliant picture. Language is fossil poetry. And I think that's a great example of mythology fossilized in a word that we use quite often. And I didn't even go into Atlas, the map, because we talk about a world atlas, and in the Middle Ages, pictures of Atlas were on top of were the like the first page or the cover of these books that had maps in them, and here he is, holding up the world with on his shoulders, poor guy.
Amazing. Yeah, another one that surprised me was when you're talking about something that's hermetically sealed.
Yeah, the god Hermes. A lot of these gods in ancient Greek were real multitaskers. They were sort of these divine Swiss Army knives. They would do all kinds of different jobs, and one of the jobs that Hermes was supposedly tasked with was keeping the secrets of alchemists. People who were trying to turn material into gold, and so he was credited with coming up with a kind of seal. They were struggling this was later on. The alchemists were struggling with how to create a seal on bottles that was completely sealed, and supposedly he helped with that. That he inspired the seal that is now known as the Hermetic seal, and or something is hermetically sealed. And I was thinking also about Atlas and the punishment that he suffered. We should probably talk about Tantalus as well.
Mm.
He was this earthly king who did some bad things and got punished, and his punishment was to be in Hades for all of eternity, in a pool of water that receded whenever he bent over to take a drink, and there was fruit above him that was just out of his reach. And from that, we get the word, of course, tantalizing, from poor Tantalus. Yeah.
Tantalizing. Poor Tantalus. And why do we panic?
Panic is a great one too. Pan was the god of woodlands and forests, and he was also known as being mischievous, and he would make noises out in the woods or out in desolate valleys when people were out there by themselves or in small groups, and it was dark, and there were these mysterious noises that scared everybody. And from his name, Pan, comes the term panic.
And now I have this in my notes on Greek, but I'm not sure it's related to the Greek god. So are nectarines being related to death? Is that from the gods or is that just from Greek?
It's from Greek because nectar and ambrosia were the things that the gods ate in order to be immortal. And so
Ah,
nectar warded off death, and that's how that came to be. But yeah, it's related to words like necrosis in your tissue.
yeah. Another Greek one I like is asterisk.
Asterisk. Yes, asterisk. Asterikos in Greek means little star, and it's related to lots and lots and lots of star words. But it looks like a star, and I can go on and on about about words related to this root because an ill-starred event is a disaster. and
Ah.
and astronauts, those people who are flying around, who are sailing through space, the astro is star, and the naut is related to words like nautical. So they're literally star sailors.
And nauseous, that's related as well.
Nauseous
Well,
is
not to asterisk, but
right, but it's related to all those words that begin with nau, because if you're on a ship and it's tossing, you're going to get nauseated.
so actually, let's go from, the highbrow words from Greek to the more modern attempts to coin words, some of which were actually just disastrous, I think.
Yes. Well, speaking of light, the term flashlight is a weird one if you think about it. And there was an attempt to coin a better word than flashlight. But we should probably talk about the word flashlight itself because,
Yeah.
you think about it, the beam is steady, right? Why do you call it a flashlight? Well, back in the late 19th century, flashlights were literally flashlights because the batteries were really weak. They didn't last very long, and
Ah.
they became improved over time. And in 1916, the Eveready Company, which produced batteries and also flashlights, wanted to show off that they had created this flashlight that worked really well. You could keep it on for a long time. And so somebody had the brilliant marketing idea to hold a nationwide contest. And
Hmm.
this contest got press everywhere. Everybody wants to win $3,000, which was a lot of money back then. And
Yeah.
so there were ads in newspapers all over the country, and people were talking about it everywhere. and people were supposed to send in a better name than Flashlight to the Eveready company, and they were gonna award the winner $3,000, and they got so many entries that they had to count them for months and months, and they finally decided to give out 4 awards to choose 4 winners. They were all women from all across the country, and the 4 winners, the entry that they all offered the same entry, and the word was Dalo.
4 people came up with
I
Dalo?
don't know how that happened. I think it's just a ridiculous word. I mean, Daylo, and the company made a big deal out of this and said, "This is a wonderful word that combines the idea of daylight and also the idea of lo and behold." I think it's a terrible name, and obviously everybody else did too, because it may have had a very short life, but it flickered out like those early flashlights. It did not last very long.
And then, did that start sort of a trend to for companies or people to have these contests to coin words?
Yeah, weirdly enough, that contest was so successful that people started trying to run contests to stir up public interest in this or that. And one of the interesting things that I found was that in 1924 there was a contest to rename jazz, which really
Huh,
surprised me. I think jazz is a great name,
yeah.
but there were a lot of jazz musicians. I was surprised to find this out. There were a lot of jazz musicians who didn't care for the word. Duke Ellington and Charlie Mingus and
Huh,
Miles Davis. They just weren't fans. Duke Ellington didn't like its association with less than savory places. And
huh.
so this band leader in 1924 named Meyer Davis ran this contest uh, nationwide again to come up with a better word than jazz. And again, people, people are so creative. They do try to cut, and people love to play with words, right? So people
Yeah.
came up with all kinds of names like fresco and frolic and happy tone and just ridiculous names. But the winner of that too, I bet you've never heard of. It was syncopep.
No, no, I haven't heard that. Syncopep. I mean,
Yes.
it's so in synchronous and
Yeah,
peppy?
yeah, that was the idea. I mean, a lot of the names that people proposed talked about, suggested the characteristics of jazz, but I'm so glad that jazz stuck around because I mean, imagine syncopep hands. It's not the same.
Jazz hands.
Right.
That's great. Was there a cash prize for that one
I
too?
believe there was. Yeah, I don't
There
remember the
was.
amount, but
Yeah. We should
again,
bring that
yeah.
back. I think companies should start doing that again. We should get prizes for coming up with words that no one's ever gonna use.
Yeah, I think a lot of people these days do it for free. We're forever getting calls on the show about, what's the word for this? What's the word for when your favorite restaurant closes? I want to nominate melancholy or gone appetit.
Oh, those are good.
Yeah,
It's fun to play with words.
yeah.
So, when Scuttlebutt, was that the result of a contest too?
Scuttlebutt was not, but Scofflaw was.
Oh, Scofflaw.
Yeah, yeah, scuttlebutt has to do with, cutting a hole in a barrel to let liquid out. If you talk about scuttling somebody's plans, you're
Yeah.
or scuttling a boat. But, did you wanna
But Scofflaw.
Scofflaw. Scofflaw, yes, that's a fascinating story, and that involved another contest that was run during Prohibition by one Delciver King, who was a Boston philanthropist, and he was very, very much in the Prohibition camp, and he just really hated the idea of anybody drinking alcohol in any, form, and so he ran this contest with his own money and offered a lot of money uh, for people to come up with a term for somebody who drinks liquor illegally. And
Hmm.
so again, there were lots of goofy suggestions like clinker and flounder and slacklaw, but somebody came up with scofflaw, And that took, for some reason, that one stuck around, and we still use that one today. We don't, prohibition's over, of course, but these days, scofflaw is sort of it's not that bad a term. It's like somebody who doesn't pay their parking ticket or somebody who goes over the speed limit a little bit. You might term that person a scofflaw. But it's fascinating to me that that one stuck and syncopep didn't.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it has a nicer sound to it. And I guess, with syncopep, we already had the word jazz that maybe most people liked, whereas there wasn't a word for scofflaw.
Yeah, you're right. And I think another point is that it's really hard to impose language change.
Mm.
It's really hard. You can try to get people to adopt a word, but usually when groups say, we want everybody to start using this word that way, it just doesn't take. Language arises organically, it bubbles up from the people, and it's really hard to change people's language that way.
Absolutely. I mean, another actually reminds me of another one. You said that one of your listeners, actually coined the word fluffle.
Yeah, well, yeah, she was involved in this term fluffle, which is, you may have seen the meme going around on the internet, that goes something like, "I just learned that the word fluffle means a group of bunnies, and I've never been happier," or something like that. And there's a cute picture of little bunnies. But yeah, um, people use this term fluffle to as a collective noun for bunnies, and we had a caller to A Way with Words who called us and wanted to find out if a story she'd been told was true, because one of her friends said, that term fluffle? My friends and I coined it when we were at the University of Alberta in Canada, and we added it to Wikipedia as a joke. And so this caller wanted to know if there was anything to that. And we did some digging, and then we turned it over to linguist Ben Zimmer, who also did some digging for the Wall Street Journal on this. And it turns out that these are probably the people who coined the term fluffle just as a joke and stuck it in Wikipedia. There's enough evidence to assume that that's the case.
That is so wonderful because it's one, it's fun to say, and two, as we were saying, there wasn't already a word for it.
Right.
So, and then it got some great publicity with pictures of cute
Right.
bunnies,
That's,
which,
yes, exactly. Exactly. And we'll see if that one lasts, but I suspect it will, just because it's so fitting. It sort of sounds
absolutely.
like what it is.
Absolutely. And then, let's back up a little and go to more to, like, everyday words, like, words we hear all the time, and some of them have such interesting etymologies, like butter.
Butter is a good one. It comes from the Greek word for cow or ox, and turon, which means cheese. And so it's butyron in ancient Greek. And that's related to other cow or ox related words like bulimia, actually, which means ox hunger, literally.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
bucolic, is a place where cows dwell. It describes that kind of pasture, kind of.
It's wonderful, and, you have a whole section in your book on flowers and words related to flowers, and that's just lovely.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I wrote a whole book years ago, years and years ago, called The Garden of Words, where I took the names of flowers and kind of jumped off in all different directions. For example, the word gladiolus. A lot of people think that we call it that because you're glad when it blooms. Well, no, that goes back to Latin. Gladiolus in Latin means little sword. And if you look at a gladiolus, the leaves are long and sword-like. And actually in German, it's Schwertlily, which means sword lily. So that's a great one. I love words like daisy, which comes from Old English dies aeg, which comes from Old English words meaning the eye of the day, because some of them open during the day and then close at night. That's why we call them day's eyes or daisies. And another beautiful one is tulip. That comes from a word that in Turkish that means turban, because it looks like
Hmm.
a little turban. It comes from Turkish and it goes back even farther to Persian.
It does, and now that I think about it.
Yeah, yeah, very picturesque. So many of those flower names are picturesque, and we talked about the word aster earlier, and that's another example. It has those sort of starry rays coming out of it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, another, sort of modern day word, that surprised me, the etymology from your book is, Ritalin.
Ritalin. Yeah, that's a fascinating story. It's an eponym, a word that comes from the name of somebody else. Because in 1944 there was an Italian researcher who was researching stimulants, and his name was Leandro Panizzone. And he, as a lot of researchers have done in the past, he first tried the drug on himself. There's a whole history of researchers give him the drug a try themselves. And he didn't really feel much of anything, but his wife, Marguerite, who went by Rita, tried it, and the drug really improved her tennis game. She took the drug, she went out on the tennis court, and she was running faster and jumping higher and hitting the ball, with more force, and she was much more focused, and she was so excited about the effects of this drug that her husband, Leandro, had, been researching that he named it in honor of her. He named it in honor of his wife, Rita. So that's Ritalin.
Rita's tennis game, and now we have that is
Yeah.
fabulous. Another one that surprised me, that was named after someone was tawdry. That is a great story.
Yeah, that's an adaptation of a saint named Saint Audrey, who was known in her youth for loving frilly neckwear. And later, when she was much older, she developed a huge tumor on her throat, and she was
Mm.
sure that this was divine judgment somehow. And so it was associated with her and the frilly neckwear. And what happened was that in this little town where she lived, there were fairs where people sold little trinkets and things like that. And Saint Audrey's lace was also sold there as a sort of frilly kind of thing that women would wear on their neck. And Saint Audrey's lace, which was kind of cheap, not so well made. St. Audrey's lace became tawdry lace, and then tawdry, like not so desirable.
Amazing. And, there's not much I love more than a well-used word, like describing a nun as maudlin, because the word comes from the idea of a repentant Mary Magdalene weeping, which is often shown in medieval paintings. Do you have favorite words like this where you delight when you find an especially good way to use them?
Wow, that's a brilliant question. Yes, maudlin comes from this image of Mary Magdalene, or Maudlin, as she was referred to, being sad. I'm trying to think of something similar. I guess when you think about someone who has a mellifluous voice, which
Mhm.
is beautiful, soothing like a flute, if that person is sweet, I secretly delight in knowing that mellifluous comes from Latin words that mean literally flowing with honey. The mel in mellifluous is a Latin word that means honey, and you see that in the Spanish word for honey, miel, and other words like that.
Is that related to the name Melissa?
Funny you should mention that. Yes, the name Melissa means honeybee in ancient
Oh,
Greek. Yeah. And if
so if Melissa has a mellifluous voice, that was
wow,
also
wow.
apt.
That's pretty much a hat trick, Mignon. That's really good. I hadn't thought about that.
Oh, well, we've done a lot on Greek, and so many words come into English from Latin too. I wanted to talk about a few of those that you cover in Friends with Words. How about preposterous? I liked
Oh,
that one.
that's a good one. What a picturesque word. And I always laugh when that's another example actually of somebody's preposterous. It comes from Latin words that literally mean before, pre, everybody knows pre means before, and posterous, which means behind. So somebody who's saying something preposterous is like it's sort of putting the cart before the horse. It's a silly image. It's preposterous.
And then what is formication?
Yeah, formication with an M is the feeling of having ants crawling all over your skin. because the Latin word formica means ant. It's related to the Spanish word hormiga, which also means ant. And formica has nothing to do with the countertop that you may have. A formica countertop, it's spelled the same way, but it's different. A formica countertop is from the words for mica. Literally, it's a substitute for how they used to do countertops with mica.
Oh my gosh, it's just for
Yeah.
Micah. I think I'm procrastinating wrapping up because this is so delightful, but so why don't you tell me about the word procrastinate?
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad you brought that up. That was another one of those words that I learned early on in Latin class. In first year Latin, you very early on learn the word cras, C-R-A-S, which means tomorrow. And that was another one of those light bulb moments where I thought, oh my gosh, does cras have anything to do with procrastinate? Ran to the dictionary, looked it up. Yes, if you're procrastinating, you're putting something off for tomorrow.
Perfect. What a great word. Well, again, I'm here with Martha Barnette and the author of the book Friends with Words Adventures in Languageland. We would love it if you shared your favorite words with us on social media. Martha, where can people find you?
Yeah, well, I invite you to visit my website, marthabarnette.com. That's Barnett with an E on the end. And you'll find me on Blue Sky and Facebook and Instagram under my name.
Wonderful. And of course, we have a bonus episode for our supporters, our Grammar Pelusians. We're going to talk about an amazing tutor that Martha had on her journey to learn Greek, a bunch of fun regionalisms, and of course, Martha's book recommendations. So look for that in your feed. And if you'd like to become a Grammar Pelusian to support the show and get the bonus episodes, visit quickanddirtytips.com/bonus to learn more. But for everyone else, that's all. Thanks for listening.